I'm Miwa Messer. I'm the producer and host of Poured Over. And Abi Dare, I'm so happy to see you. The Girl with the Louding Voice was a really big deal when it was published in the U.S. in hardcover for the first time in 2020. I have that year right, don't I?
You did, yes.
And you're back with a sequel called And
I'm
So
back.
I Roar. And Aduni is back, and I love this kid. I love this character, and you put her through some stuff in this new novel. So I'm going to ask you when you started working on the sequel.
I think I started in, first of all, I'm so excited to be back here. Thank you for having me. Yes, we're back, Dunia and I. I think I started towards the end of 2022. So I had a series of false starts. But yes, end of 2022.
And we're taping this in the summer of 2024. So this is pretty quick in the writing. And you have taken Aduni, and she gets into a car. She's being taken back to her home village. And Tia, the woman who has taken her away from her very terrible situation in The Girl with the Louding Voice, jumps into the car with her. And obviously we will be spoiler-free in this conversation, but you had my attention from the opening of the book. You certainly had more of my attention when Tia jumps into the car, because also Tia, she's from Lagos. She is not prepared for tiny village life. She is not prepared what this means for young girls like Aduni. How did you start this book? When did you decide this is what you had to follow up Girl with the Louding Voice with? I mean, I'm being slightly cryptic intentionally, but
so I'm trying to think about when, the whole idea. I think I had played with the thought. It was more, it's just a bit of a thought when I finished The Girl with the Louding Voice after my mother read her first fiction in 30 years and demanded a sequel. But I couldn't find Aduni's voice. I think her voice for me sort of wandered away after The Girl with the Louding Voice. So I left it and I tried to write other things. But then in 2022 was the end of 2022, her voice barged into me. And it felt very much like I needed to talk about what happened immediately after. And not, even though my mother had the 20-year plan, for her, I think for me was really the immediate sort of next day, what happens. But I didn't want it to just be a Duni story. I think I very much wanted to tell the story of a woman like Tia, a woman like myself, and sort of bring her backstory to the fore and explore that. And I also wanted to write in standard English. I know it sounds a bit, I just wanted a break from, as much as I love Aduni, I wanted to play with the idea of writing two voices and see how that would pan out. And so I wrote the first chapter in Tia's voice, and I think, it's not too bad. I think I can do this. What more can we explore? And then I brought in Aduni's voice. That's sort of how it came out.
Well, and Aduni and the other girls in the village are both they're all kind of looking at Tia saying, you and your big English, which, is kind of a great way to describe it. Because, I mean, again, Tia is from Lagos. She is not a girl from the rural parts of Nigeria. She has a very different experience of the country and the world. And she doesn't quite understand exactly what that difference is going to look like until she gets to where they're going. And boy, is it a shock to the system for her. But I love the two voices, because the thing is, too, like we watch in the first book in Louding Voice, we watch Aduni's voice change as she's in the city, as she's getting more education, as she's reading more and spending more time with the Collins dictionary. I was curious to see how you were going to handle the shift in language, because obviously Aduni is not who she was when we meet her in the first book. But how you make sure that Tia can communicate with everyone else as well. So you've talked about this in the past, though, that the language you use and I'm going to just put both novels together in this case, isn't the sort of the standard pidgin English that is used in Nigeria. You had to create an entire language for both books. Yes.
I had to borrow from everywhere, including my 10-year-old daughter, who is now 9, completely to create Aduni's language. Yes.
Right. So how do you start, though? Are you starting with the imagery? Are you starting with character. I mean, it's not as if you're sitting around making lists of words, right?
No.
I mean,
no. I very much see my sins in my head.
okay.
So I have to wear a hat of the character. So I wear like I don't know, it feels like goggles or something. And I'm thinking these are these goggles. And I wear it over my eyes and my head and my brain. And I see the scene play out first. Then I say to myself, how would Aduni describe this?
Mm-hmm.
And so then I begin to do that. And sometimes when I don't have the right words, I would just use standard English and then come back when I'm in the right, when my brain is connected to the right word. And I think that's what I do. And that's what I do with this book.
So everything is character first then? Literally everything you're talking about. Yeah, yes. It sounds like it.
Yes.
I'm so glad your mom demanded a sequel. I think that's great. I think that's totally great that she demanded a sequel. But you have not lived in Nigeria in what, 20 years? Almost 20 years?
Nearly 25 now, 24.
Okay, 25.
Yeah, 24.
So I need to ask you about research, though, because again, like there's a lot that went into the background of both books. And this is the new one. And again, I don't want to give anything away, but it's expansive in a way that you might not expect for being back in a very tiny rural community. You are covering some really big global issues, trafficking, climate change. You know, the patriarchy is everywhere. But there's a lot that's happening. So can we talk about how you structured the book and how you figured out where the research had to come from and where it needed to start?
Yeah, sure. I think the beautiful thing is there's a lot of research that spilled over from Girl with a Louding Voice. I mean, at Denise Village, Ikati. And generally, I have an interest in sort of traditional stuff, sort of rituals that happen in villages. I tend to just read stuff on that whenever I have the time.
Right.
So that came. But I think the research around the climate issues, the reason why Aduni has to go back, some of the environmental issues, I had to have conversations around that. So I spoke to a few people, but particularly somebody who works in a region that I envision Aduni's village to be from. So it works out quite nicely. Somewhere on the border between on the edge of northern Nigeria. So not quite northern Nigeria, but just somewhere there. And he had experienced a lot of issues with the sort of infrequent rainfall and the rainfall patterns, the changing rainfall patterns. His father was a farmer or is a farmer. And he talked all these amazing stuff about seedlings and planting and drought. And he has a charity that actually educates and empowers women within rural areas on how to deal with the effects of climate change. And so he had so much to say to me. So I soaked in a lot of that. And then just, like I said, just going back to Aduni's stuff, reading up on the issues. So when I wanted to talk about the main issues that the girls were facing, we talked about some of the supporting cast. I would say it was easy to pinpoint one of the most pressing issues that were affecting girls within rural Africa, within rural Nigeria. It's really just, okay, what are the main issues here? What affects them most? And just finding the right character to fit into that issue. So that's sort of how it was. But when I was writing, as you know, there's so many different voices in the book. I really wanted to write a relentless. I loved 24. And I've always loved the idea of writing something that would take less over 24 hours. It's really weird. But in Africa and rural Africa, with the voices, it's just really weird to desire by. And so when I started writing, I didn't go into a lot of backstory. But it was very flimsy first draft, I would say. It felt like there were a lot of holes, gaping holes. And so I had to then start figuring out, okay, how do we go back into the past and bring that without taking away from the immediacy of the novel? And that was my biggest challenge, is trying to, and finding the right character. So we find Tia talking to an older woman, and we have Aduni speaking, and letters and all the stuff that comes in. So the book says, what can I put in there that would make the book still feel kind of relentless, but at the same time, a bit slowed down?
Yeah, no, the pacing is really terrific. There are a couple of chapters, well, more than a couple of chapters, but the girls are putting on sort of a television chat show, a talk show. while they are waiting for something to happen, and just the sort of creativity that comes out of these kids.
Well,
They are adolescent girls. I mean, the oldest is, 21, and the youngest is what, 12?
Well, yes.
Yeah. And so the idea that they are so versed in the world, and kids, I mean, this, kids notice everything. They notice everything. And, maybe they're not sitting in front of a television for 3 hours, but they know, and they pick up on us, and they pick up on how we're responding and whatnot. And so watching these kids sort of navigate space outside of the village while being firmly in the moment, it was a little heartbreaking. I'm not giving anything away with that. But are you planning out these beats? I mean, I know you just said I was trying to slow down the narrative in certain parts, but I'm also just thinking in general, it's very cinematic. So it's interesting to hear you say, 24 was an inspiration. It is very cinematic, though. And it's like, well, and here's this set piece, and it gets us, like, we're always just moving forward. So are you mapping this out on the whiteboard? Are you sitting down and outlining this before? I mean, I know you said you had a flimsy draft, but part of me is kind of like, yeah, but even with a second or a third draft, you had to have had some kind of map.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe not calling it exactly that, but like you don't, even with multiple drafts, it doesn't just suddenly clean up.
No.
Right.
No, I do outline actually quite extensively. I would probably outline for 3 months, trying to get to know the character. If I don't know the character, so I do knew her from one. But with this one, I did outline, but I think that the same you're talking about, so the talk show, that came from, I had started to actually write in the actual point of view character. So Zainab and Chi-Chi, but it felt very much like everybody was talking at me, right? So this is me, this is my story. And it was the same sort of horrible life, horrible. And I thought, no, Abi, you need to, I'm not the kind of writer, I write everything, but I like humor. I like to laugh, I like to. And so I thought, look, I need to figure out a way to make this come to life a lot more. I need to not bore myself. I'm writing for myself, essentially, first. And so I'm in the kitchen, and I'm up in the kitchen. I'm thinking, how on earth am I going to do this? And it just kind of dropped in my spirit. I was like, oh my goodness, a talk show. And so I literally drop whatever I'm doing. I go straight to my computer. And I have this font. I had to change the font into the Courier font. The one that you see on scripts. And
yeah, I do.
I did that. And I began to sort of figure out the transcript that I wrote. I think I wrote Zainab's scene first, I'm not sure. And I loved what came out of it. I really enjoyed writing. And I thought, okay, I think I feel better. I need to enjoy what I'm writing. And even if it's really heavy and really sad, I need to have a passion to carry that through, and without feeling heavy-hearted, too heavy-hearted in a way that would burden the reader. I don't know if that makes sense. And so that allowed me to enjoy bringing those girls' issues to a page without feeling like pity me kind of story.
They have big personalities. These adolescents, these girls have big personalities, which is something I really appreciate. The other thing I appreciated, though, is watching Tia be out of her element entirely. And she really doesn't know what she doesn't know. She is so well-intentioned. She wants Aduni to have the world. She's just, and she is, if you're a kid like Aduni, it's really great to have someone like Tia in your corner, but watching her sort of flop about unintentionally, because again, she just doesn't know what she doesn't know. She thinks she's going to walk in with her cell phone and fix everything. And just, maybe I'm identifying a little more with her than I was planning on, because, honestly, I know nothing about this kind of community. So again, you've got to step out of your own comforts. I know you mentioned that she sort of felt a little bit like you, and certainly you have language in common, but let's talk about the evolution of her character, because she could have gone in a lot of different ways.
She could have. I think, okay, so I tried to do something personal last year too. I did set up, I didn't try. I set up a foundation to help girls and put them back in schools from places like Aduni's village. And a bit like Tia, I sort of went in with guns blazing, like, we're going to change the world. And having conversations with some of these girls and realizing that actually some of their parents do not actually want their daughters to continue their education. Some of them do not even want to continue their education. And I couldn't understand that. And a part of me also didn't want to really listen because I felt like I have a solution for you. So what you're telling me really doesn't matter. You need to hear what I have to say. And it felt like, when you're offering sort of sweets to a diabetic patient and you're thinking this is really great for you, and they're thinking, no, it's not. I'm just trying to meet them halfway. So maybe that's part of where that came from is Tia. Many of us have good intentions, but sometimes we need to pause and try to understand the tradition, the culture, what has been set way before you came on the scene, what has worked for them. And I think maybe that's where some of that came from, is you can't just come and change 100-year-old tradition and think, because I have the best intentions. Yeah, I think it was from that, and just putting the Nabi tea on and having Tia come across as just a bit ignorant, but still smart in a way.
No, I totally get it. I also really like her relationship with her husband, Ken. I mean, they're having some problems, but it's not operatic. It's not over the top. It's just, I mean, they are clearly in love, but trying to figure out some stuff. And they're navigating it like adults who've been together for a really long time. Yeah, he finds out some stuff that he wasn't planning on finding out, and she certainly wasn't planning on having him find out either. But that pairing seems really well set to me. And I'm wondering where Ken came from.
Yeah, I think that in book one, and The Girl with Loud Voice, Ken came across as this clueless husband who just went with whatever happened to his wife and couldn't. And I think I took on board some of that feedback and trying to present the male characters with a bit more agency, with a bit more heart and feeling. I'm not a man hater. Trying to show that, look, I can try to write a man that has his own issues with the past and hiding the truth from his wife. But here's his wife who also has something to hide. And how do they navigate that together? But it took a lot of sort of exploring. There's a lot of rewriting of the dialogue between both of them. I think that I think I did a lot more work on that relationship, because the first draft was Ken was not like initial feedback was, nah, he comes across as really horrible. And so I had to go back with Abby. You need to be I think writers need to be a bit more, as a writer, I need to tend to be very conscious of how I'm creating a character that is not a character that I'm comfortable with. Mm-hmm. So I'm comfortable with Tia. I can figure out what she does. I'm comfortable with that. I'm all the girls. But I'm writing a man like Ken, who is not all evil. He's done some bad things. How do I do that without coming across as caricature or cliche or whatever it is? And so that took a lot of trial and error.
You have a master's or a PhD in creative writing?
A master's.
Okay, master's. So Girl with the Louding Voice was started as your thesis, didn't it? You finished it shortly after you've gotten it. And you have a couple of different degrees, right? Don't you have one in sort of project management, and there's something else?
I have one in law, one in project management. Yes, trying to find my feet. Really. Okay.
But obviously education has worked for you, right? I mean, it's partially how you ended up in the UK, right? Was school in the
Yes.
States? Okay. So this idea, right, that parents might not want their daughters to be educated, or their daughters pick up on it and say, well, maybe I don't want to be educated. I mean, for women like you and I, that's kind of really hard to process. It's really, really hard to process. But I'm going to ask you to tell the story. You've done this in other places, but you've talked about how your mom's education sort of influenced you and made your world bigger and sort of brought you to this point where you could write both of these novels. So would you tell that story?
My mother, when I was about 16, as many 16-year-olds, I was very sort of infatuated with all the attention from all the boys. And I thought, look, I'm so stunning and all that. And so my mother has this conversation. One evening, I was going outside. I hope my daughters are not listening, because they're going to use it against me. But I was going to, because one is nearly 16. So she's like, Mom, you did that. So I was going to throw out the bin, but I actually was going to meet this guy. And so my mother sort of was watching me. I didn't realize. So I go out, have this conversation with this guy, and my way back home with the bin, my mom stops me downstairs and she says, you know that all of this is going to fade. Your beauty is going to fade. Everything is going to fade. But one thing that will not fade is what you've put in here. And she sort of touched her brain, her skull, her head. And she goes, that is going to serve you forever. And that conversation has followed me all my life. So when my mother brought me to the UK, she tricked me into coming to the UK, by the way. She told me I was coming for summer holidays. And I got here and she said, you're not going back. I wrote an essay about it titled, You're Not Going Back. And so I'm here and studying law. And every time I wanted to give up, studying law was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. I kept on thinking, you're investing in yourself. So my mother said to me, your biggest investment is in yourself. No one can take that away from you. And her education, her sector, she separated from my dad when I was about 10, got divorced. And raising children as a single mother in Nigeria, then now is hard. Then it was even ridiculous. She had to really fight to give us the best so that nothing could come back to her to say she failed as a mother. And I remember that quite often.
And motherhood really is a defining piece of this story for lots of different characters in lots of different ways, and not necessarily in ways you might expect. And I feel like that's something new in this book. I mean, Adoni's mother is obviously not part of the picture in the first book. And certainly there are other older women characters who are like, yeah, you're just the housemaid. Like, I'm not interested in you kind of thing. But this has become sort of more of a 360-degree portrait of this kid. I mean, you know, the first book being education. And now we're just kind of like, oh, wait, but here's the stuff we didn't know. And wow, it's a lot. So how do you balance? I mean, obviously you're trying to not write a polemic because polemics are no fun. You're letting your characters do everything, but you still have to balance like narrative thrust, and you have to balance the amount of detail. Like, how do we get where we are with all of this? How do you do the things beyond revision? Because I feel like there's a bunch of different things happening here before you even get to revision.
So it's interesting because when I go into writing, I think I want to say something, or I want to explore something. I want to question something. I think that's what every writer does. And then I ask myself, who is best placed to help me with this? And characters like Adoni's mother, I wanted to, I felt like she was such, even though she wasn't alive in the first book, she was dead by then. Adoni carried her everywhere. And I felt like it just would do a disservice to me, to Adoni, not to talk a little bit about her, especially because she was this, in Adoni's mind, she's this perfect, unblemished, angelic mother. And growing up, you know, I certainly thought my mother was unblemished, angelic, and I wonder if my kids think the same, but we're all flawed. And I wanted to show Adoni's mother's flaws. But obviously, Adoni would not know this. She doesn't, you know, I'm not giving her spoilers, but she's never going to know, you know. But I just wanted to say, look, her flawed. This woman is deeply flawed, and she made some you know, it depends on how you look at it. She might have made some mistakes or not, but she's not an angel.
It's really trippy, that moment where you realize your parents are human and had a history before you showed up.
I think I was heartbroken.
Right? And you're like, oh, wait, you're a person. Oh, you're not just my mom.
Yeah.
You're like, okay. And I kind of remember having my head busted open as an adolescent thinking, what? No, you're my mom.
I thought parents never lied. You know, I thought they never lied. I thought they were perfect. And now I'm a parent, and I make so many mistakes. And because I'm now, we're in a culture where we speak. My kids talk a lot more than I did to my parents. So I apologize. But my mother and my father, they never apologized for anything. So I thought and then just realizing these things, I just wanted to really explore that a little bit.
I do. I like the disconnect between Lagos and Adoni's hometown, because again, I have no experience, sort of this kind of rural life, right? Like I grew up in a suburb. I felt like I was probably living in the sticks, but I was not living in the sticks. There were major airports and other means of escape, but watching all of these girls navigate the space and the not just the community, but also the terrain, you're walking everywhere. There's one car and the chief has it. I mean, it is a level of poverty. Like, you are writing about class again in a way that some people might not necessarily expect. I mean, Tia and Ken they're comfortable. They have a nice life. They want to do well. They can afford, certain things and travel and all of this kind of thing. But again, the difference, and it's a car ride. I mean, it's not an hour, but it is a car ride. It's not like they're, on a ship and then a plane and then 3 buses and walking for 15 miles. Like, you're in a car. But the shift is wild. And we're talking about this in 2024, and you were writing this a couple of years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what's that like for you?
I think I've gone beyond the show. I mean, I know there's poverty, I know there's class differences, but I think for me, it's tradition and culture that I find the most fascinating. I'll tell you, I don't know if you heard about it. I mean, it was all over the news not so long ago. Somewhere in northern Nigeria, the governor of the state decided to marry off 100 girls. This happened on the 7th of July, who had lost their parents in the Boko Haram attacks. And the women's minister tried to stop this. He tried to get an injunction to stop it. And what came back was that the girls actually wanted to get married. So there was, the issue, they said to us, people like us who were like, I can't believe this. Mind your business. We're very happy to do this. And I think those are the things that not just shock me, but make me realize that we all have a very different way of processing life and accepting life. And sometimes it's not just about poverty, because I listened to a lot of interviews with educated women who felt that there was nothing wrong with marrying off 100 girls the same day instead of educating them. Like, why? They want to get married, let them get married. And I think that's the hardest thing for me to navigate. I think that, and you're right, I mean, growing up, and even in parts of the UK, you drive to certain parts and there's such a glaring difference in the way of lives, people, and you can't understand that. It's just, and especially now with technology and YouTube, and you watch. I was saying to somebody the other day that one of my favorite things to watch now is a show on YouTube called, I don't know if I'm allowed to say it, it's called 100 Different Ways of Getting to School, or the most difficult ways to get to school.
Okay.
In recent times. And you see people like in the mountains, in Nepal or somewhere, and it takes them 6-7 days to get to school. And this is 2020.
Right.
So these things happen. Like, life is more than just the bubble that I'm in. And I love to see and explore and maybe appreciate this a little bit more. Some of it obviously infuriates me, like getting 100 girls married, but it's just really shocking, and at the same time not shocking. I don't know.
No, I mean, that's partially why fiction works so well.
Yes.
Right? Because the whole idea is to put yourself into someone else's shoes, right? I mean, we've seen the studies, like reading fiction increases your empathy for other human beings. And me sitting here in New York talking to you, no, please do not marry off 100 girls. Please do not do that. We don't have to do that anymore. And yet it's certainly not, it happened. And
on the 7th of July happened.
Right.
2024.
And you and I are taping this not that long after.
Yes.
In fact, we are taping this about 2 weeks later.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's just a reminder that, we all still are figuring out a lot of different things. But you do have influences. There are literary influences that have helped you, because obviously voice and character are the things that drive you first, without a doubt. I mean, I've read both books. Voice, I mean, Aduni's voice is so sticky and good. and and the other women too. I mean, I not to belittle the other characters, and the evolution of Ken still surprises me, which is why I had to ask you about it, because I was like, I was not expecting this dude.
Yeah.
This was not the guy I was expecting. But in terms of the writers who have helped make you Abi Daré, can we talk about some of those folks? I mean, you're pulling from a lot of different places.
I am. I think for me, one of the ones that is so, I mean, I read a lot of books, as we all do, but I think Alice Walker with The Color Purple was one of the most defining, sort of eye-opening reads for me because of the voice of that character. Until that point, I didn't think I could unrestrict myself from feeling like I had to sound all literary and intelligent to get published. And I think that I had written myself before The Girl with the Latin Voice, had been very pretentious and not me. I felt like I had to sound a certain way.
Yeah.
And reading that, I thought, goodness me, I can do whatever I want to do. I can just create a character and let that character be whoever they want to be and see what goes. And I think it's the most freeing thing. For me, it was so freeing, so wonderful. Yes, and so I think Alice Walker was one of the biggest ones for me.
Would you have written Louding Voice without having gone to graduate school? Did you need sort of the structure and the time and the space to be able to really create a world? I mean, world building is a phrase that we toss around very easily when it comes to science fiction or fantasy or what have you. But I mean, any novel has a world built for it. And I'm just wondering if you needed sort of space to stretch before you were going to be able to write this book.
Thank you for that. I think what I was looking for really was validation. It was, I had been battered with so many rejections of previous works that I thought, I'm going to give this one more try. And if I don't get into this, then I'm going to face my day job, even though it felt like wearing the wrong size shoes all the time. And so when I applied for that, I just wanted someone to say yes. But I didn't think that yes came with a hefty fees and 2 years of your time and a book. And so when I got the email saying, well, would you like to come for an interview? I actually turned the interview down. I think I turned the interview down the first time. And I thought, I'm going to go away and never come back. But the supervisor emailed me and said, okay, we can have it next week. And so I'm sitting and I went to it. I think I went for that interview during my lunch break at work. I'm thinking, it was 10 minutes away. I'm thinking, Abi, you need to get up now. You really need to get up now. And so I go in for that interview and I get in. But what I quickly realized when I began to attend the classes was I'm not in a unique position. Writing is solitary, and sometimes you think you're alone and we're getting all the rejections, but we need each other and we need different. And so the masters helped with dealing with critique. I remember the first time I got critiqued so bad, I cried and said, I'm never going back. And I did. And I think I took it a bit too hard because I was told that I couldn't write great characters. I was told that my characters they felt very lifeless on the page. And so Aduni was a way of saying, I'll show you what being alive on the page means. So it was great in that way. It really did help. But I was only meant to write 15,000 words to get a distinction. But I ended up finishing the book because I really loved the process.
Well, I think it shows, too. I mean, it is possible to have a sense of play, right, when you're writing, even if you are wrestling with some stuff that isn't always pleasant. Let's put it that way, right? Like Aduni goes through some stuff in the first book, and she goes through some stuff in the second book as well. And it doesn't mean, though, that you have to have this sort of dour. I mean, you were saying it yourself. You were like, well, I thought I had to write in this very specific voice. It wasn't me. And I think there are going to be some people who always want to read the straight up narrative nonfiction version of a moment, a culture, or what have you. And then there are other people who are just like, well, hand me a novel because I just want to know what it feels like.
Yeah.
And it's such a different response, right? To be able to feel what this group of kids is going through, or this one specific kid, or what have you. I mean, these are coming of age novels that don't necessarily follow a traditional mold.
Yes. And I think it's hard being a fiction writer because, we talked about research. One thing I did do a lot was listen to really hard interviews about girls who had gone through some of the stuff. And there was a lot of crying from me. It was hard. And and I think this is why the talk show for me was the easiest way.
Yeah.
Because you have to write the stories with dignity and respect. And you want to be able to write the story and meet a girl like that who says, you wrote my story and you wrote it well. Thank you. And it did happen with a girl with the loud voice. When I went to Nigeria, I met girls at this charity foundation, and it was like an after school sort of setting. They would come there and recite poetry and explain. They acted out the girl with the loud voices, acted out a scene from it. And they did it so well. And I cried so hard. And to hear them say, Abi, you told my story. And I'm not sure what part of their story I told, because obviously it's confidential stuff. They didn't tell me everything. But
right.
I think that gives me a lot of joy. But it's not an easy thing to do.
Well, I was going to ask too, did writing this book change you? And So I Roared it is bigger in scope in a way than Girl with the Louding Voice. And again, there is some stuff that happens that is deeply uncomfortable, and it does make you raise an eyebrow and say, this is 2024, what is happening? But it's the emotional truth of the thing, right? So where are you now that you've finished and this book is about to be in the world?
I am thinking I want to explore something else. I don't know. I think that before I wrote the sequel, I knew that there was still something in me. And maybe that thing was maybe establishing, I talked about the nonprofit and stuff, maybe it was that, but I needed to, so going back and researching the stories, I feel there's I feel very frustrated, to be honest. I feel very frustrated. And I feel like I have used my voice, my louding voice twice now, and I'm never going to stop doing that. But I want to see what else I can do with my fiction.
Right.
I don't know. We might come back and see or something. I'm like, so Abi, you're back with that Judy. I don't know. For now.
I can be patient. I can sit in the corner and hang out and wait. Why not have options? You said yourself, I didn't have her voice. I was trying something else, and then her voice came back.
Yes. So, that was almost evangelical, these things I'm doing with these books. It's a good feeling, but sometimes you just want to write for the fun of writing.
I get that. I can think of a lot of things I've read too, where it's sometimes you just want to have a good time.
Yeah, but I honestly don't think I can be that right now. Because I'm already trying to figure out something else. I'm thinking, but I'm really passionate about the thing, but I need to show it in the book. So just see.
Well, I think you're still fun. I think you have other pieces that are coming into the fun. Let's put it that way. Abi, it's been so cool talking to you, but I think we're getting close to spoilers. So I'm going to say thank you so much. I'm glad Aduni was back. I will wait and see what the third book is going to be. Maybe it's her, maybe it's not. But I will say, And So I Roared is pretty great. I will also suggest, too, if you haven't read Girl with the Louding Voice, it's okay. This book stands on its own. Yes, there are layers that you get, and certainly the new Ken, you do get a different piece of the story, but the book does stand on its own. So don't feel like you have to start with Girl with the Louding Voice, though if you have read it, there's some pretty cool stuff that you discover. So on that note, Abi Daré, thank you so much for joining us on Poured Over.
Thank you so much for having me. I had a wonderful, wonderful time. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Poured Over is a Barnes & Noble production. To help other readers find us, please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts.